Imagine this. The sun has not yet touched the canopy. The Amazon is still breathing. Insects, river water, the deep hum of something ancient underneath everything. And then, from somewhere inside that green wall, a sound cuts through. Allahu Akbar, the call to prayer. Not from a city, not from a minaret visible on any map, from a clearing inside one of the most remote stretches of jungle on earth. A small wooden mosque, worn steps, a generator flickering. A man named, call him Ibrahim, standing barefoot on a mat, forehead pressed to the floor. He has never been to Mecca. He has never seen the desert. His ancestors crossed the ocean in chains before they crossed it again as servants. And yet, for nearly 200 years, his family has prayed. Every day, without interruption, without fanfare, without anyone in the outside world knowing they existed at all. This is Guyana, South America, and almost nobody is talking about what happened here. Let me tell you something about Guyana. Most people, if you ask them, could not find it on a map. It sits quietly on the northern coast of South America, sandwiched between Venezuela, Brazil, and Suriname, a country roughly the size of Idaho, with fewer than 1 million people. Roughly 90% of its territory is untouched rainforest, jaguar country, river country, country that swallows you whole if you go looking. When people think of Islam, they think of the Middle East, perhaps Southeast Asia, perhaps West Africa, perhaps, if they are generous, Central Asia. They do not think of a jungle on the edge of the Amazon basin. And yet, there are approximately 50,000 Muslims in Guyana, possibly more. They have their own organizations, their own schools, their own mosques, over 125 of them scattered across the country. 2 Islamic holidays are recognized as national public holidays, and in 2020, Guyana elected its first Muslim president, making it the only country in South America ever to do so. How did this happen? How did a faith born in the deserts of Arabia find itself alive, breathing, practicing, praying, deep inside one of the most impenetrable jungles on the planet? The answer stretches back further than most people realize, and it begins not with a rival, but with chains. Before 1838, before the sugarcane and the indentured ships, before the mosques were built, there were already Muslims in Guyana. They came from West Africa, Mandingo, Fulani, 2 of the most Islamically literate peoples on the continent, societies where scholars memorized the Quran for generations, where courts were conducted in Arabic, where Islam was not a foreign faith, but the architecture of entire civilizations. The colonial machine tore them from that world. They were loaded onto ships, packed below the waterline, brought to British Guyana to cut cane in a climate they had never imagined, on land they had never chosen. And yet, something extraordinary happened. In 1763, decades before the formal abolition of slavery, a rebellion broke out. It was led by a man the Dutch colonizers simply called Kofi. He would later become Guyana's national hero. What historians found remarkable was this: the terms for peace that Kofi sent to the Dutch, his demands, his conditions, his defiance written on paper, were composed in Arabic. Think about what that means. Inside the brutality of plantation slavery in a colony on the edge of the South American jungle, someone was literate in Arabic. Someone had carried the Quran in their memory across the Atlantic. Someone was still, quietly, defiantly, a Muslim. But the machine of slavery was relentless. The Fulani, the Mandingo, their numbers were scattered. Their children were separated. The language of prayer faded under decades of violence and control. By the early 1800s, the visible Muslim community in Guyana had been effectively erased, silenced. But the silence would not last long. The year is 1838. Britain has just abolished slavery. The plantation owners, still enormously powerful, still enormously wealthy, face a crisis. They have land, they have infrastructure, they have nothing without labor. So they look east. Over the next 80 years, Britain would bring 240,000 people from the Indian subcontinent to British Guyana under a system called indentureship. They would be bound by contract, 5 years of work in exchange for passage and wages that barely sustained life. They would sign documents many of them could not read. They would board ships from Calcutta, from Madras, from Bombay, traveling for weeks into an unknown. 84% were Hindu, but 16% were Muslim. These were not nameless abstractions. The immigration certificates that survive today are remarkable documents. They list district of origin, physical description, caste, trade, and under religion, Musliman, Musulman, Mohammedan. The spellings vary. The British clerks were careless with names they found unpronounceable, but the faith is recorded over and over. They came from Lucknow, from Agra, from the Mughal heartlands of Uttar Pradesh, cities that once stood at the center of Islamic civilization in South Asia, cities with Sufi poetry in their walls, where Urdu was born at the meeting point of Arabic, Persian, and Hindi. They came from Peshawar, from Kashmir, from Hyderabad. These were people who carried a rich intellectual and spiritual inheritance, and they brought it with them into the jungle. Imagine, just pause and hold this, a man from Lucknow, a scholar's son or a trader or a farmer from a small village in Uttar Pradesh. He signs his name or places his thumbprint on a contract he may not fully understand. He is told there is work in a place called British Guyana. He does not know where that is. He boards a ship. He watches the Indian coastline disappear. He will never see it again.
What happened next is one of the quiet miracles of human stubbornness. These indentured Muslims, exhausted, displaced, homesick, often illiterate in English, began almost immediately to rebuild the architecture of their faith. By 1890, just 52 years after arrival, Guyana had 29 mosques. By 1920, 50 mosques. Think about who built them. People with no money. People working 6 days a week for wages that kept them barely alive on plantation lands they did not own. And yet, on what little they had, they built structures for prayer. They scraped together wood and corrugated zinc. They appointed imams from among themselves. They kept the Quran alive in Guyanese soil. They called their new home home, but they did not forget where the Qibla pointed. There is something else worth understanding, something that makes the Guyanese Muslim story genuinely unusual. In India, the ancestral homeland, the 20th century would deliver catastrophic religious violence. The 1947 partition of India and Pakistan would leave nearly 2 million people dead in Hindu-Muslim bloodshed. Neighborhoods that had coexisted for centuries would tear themselves apart overnight. But in Guyana, that did not happen. The Hindus and the Muslims had arrived on the same ships. They had worked the same plantations. They had shared the same suffering. Without the political structures that weaponized religion back in South Asia, something different grew here. Not conflict, but coexistence. Hindus and Muslims in Guyana to this day maintain what scholars describe as a genuine and quiet solidarity, forged not by ideology but by shared history. In Guyana, there is even a word for Muslims embedded in the local vernacular. They are called Fulaman, a contraction of Fulani, a linguistic ghost of the West African Muslims who came first, who were erased by slavery, but whose names somehow survived in the cultural memory of the place. The dead leave echoes. If you are watching this and you feel what I feel, that the world contains more astonishing, overlooked stories than we will ever have time to tell, then you already know why this channel exists. Stay with me, because this story is not finished yet, and where it ends in 2020 is perhaps the most unexpected chapter of all. Today, Guyana's Muslim community is smaller in percentage than it once was. At independence in 1966, Muslims were nearly 9% of the population. By the 2012 census, that figure had fallen to 6.8%, roughly 50,000 people. The reason is largely emigration. 3 generations of Guyanese Muslims have built lives in Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom. The community contracts quietly. And yet, what remains is vivid. Walk through Georgetown, Guyana's capital, and you will see the minarets rising alongside colonial-era church spires. Mosques sit beside temples. The call to prayer weaves through the same air that carries the bell and the conch. Eid al-Adha is a national public holiday. So is Mawlid, the Prophet's birthday. Ramadan is observed openly and warmly. In 2024, Guyana launched its first national Ramadan village, a public space of spiritual reflection, cultural exchange, and community. Streets lit, food shared, in the middle of a South American country that the world never imagined would host something like this. And then there is the moment that made every Guyanese Muslim stop and breathe differently. August 2020. Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali was inaugurated as President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, a Muslim, publicly practicing, the son of the indentured community, the son of a story that began on plantation fields a century and a half before. He became the first and only Muslim head of state in the history of South America. Let that land. From a man chained to a sugar field whose peace terms were written in Arabic, to a man who took the oath of office over an entire nation in the same country, on the same soil. History does not forget, it waits. There is a question that follows me through every story on this channel. What does faith do to a people who have lost everything else? The Mandingo scholar, dragged from his libraries in chains, whispering a prayer in Arabic in a language his captors could not understand. The man from Lucknow, pressed into a ship's hold, carrying the Quran not as a book, because he had no book, but as a memory, a sound, a practice folded into his bones. The grandson of an indentured laborer, building a mosque from corrugated zinc and salvaged wood on the edge of the jungle because he could not imagine not praying. And Ibrahim, standing barefoot on his mat, forehead to the floor, in a clearing in the Amazon basin before the sun has touched the canopy. Faith does not require marble floors. It does not require the right hemisphere or the right century or the right circumstances. It requires only this: someone, in whatever jungle life has placed them in, who decides again today to remember. The Muslims of Guyana remembered, and in the remembering they became something extraordinary, a community planted in impossible soil and still, after all this time, green. Like this video and subscribe my channel for more interesting videos like this.